Good evening. Let's head on over to Genesis chapter 37. Tonight we get to talk about Joseph.
Yay.
I like Joseph.
He's one of my favorite Bible characters.
We have some basic themes for tonight. One of the biggest is you meant it for bad, but God meant it for good. That over and over again we'll see that in the story, that God redeems all of our struggles. You also see Joseph being an excellent man, a man of righteousness, a man of goodness, reliable, and you'll see him rise to the top over and over again. He's one of the few guys where almost nothing bad is said about him. Some people would say nothing bad. I would say you look at some of this stuff and you can kind of go, well, I don't know. I think he enjoyed, things. But he's represented quite well. And Daniel is another guy that is represented quite well. Chuck Missler likes to say both of them are executors, and therefore, they're good for that reason. In Joseph, we've got a lot of parallels to Jesus Christ, which is really interesting. I mean, a lot of parallels. I'm going to dash through these because there's so many. His special coat reminds us of Christ's robe, made of one piece. They were both hated because of their words. They were both delivered up because of envy. They were both sold by their brethren for the price of a slave. They were both falsely accused. They both went to Egypt in their youth. Joseph was thrown into prison. Jesus placed into a tomb. That's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Joseph had the cup and baker. One saved, the other lost. Jesus, two people on the cross. One saved, the other lost. Joseph emerged from prison to be exalted. Jesus emerged from the tomb to be exalted. Joseph received a gentle bride after being exalted and before his brothers recognized him. Jesus will receive the church as his bride before the Jewish people will recognize him. Through Joseph, the nations at the time, all the nations at the time were spared from the famine. Through Jesus, the nations are saved. Both were not recognized by their family and friends. Joseph knew his brother at their first meeting, but they did not recognize him until they met for a second time. Joseph forgave his brothers. Jesus on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So it's interesting. There are lots of parallels in between the two righteous men. But in chapter 37, I call this Sale of a Dreamer, we have Jacob. And Jacob has had the kids, and Joseph was the son of the beloved wife, Rachel. And he was 17 years old and hanging out with the flock. He is the youngest brother of 12 and from the favored wife. He is given this special tunic. It's hard to exactly translate what it is. Some people say that it's long sleeves. Some people say many colors. Some people say made of one piece. It's possible that all the three are true. There is a fascinating archaeological discovery that we'll talk about a little bit later of a statue that might very well be Joseph. And it shows him wearing a very special coat, a very unusual tunic. So he had these dreams. And he had his brothers. Now this is where you wonder, he even if he was a great, perfect guy, not the best interpersonal skills in the sense of, I had a dream, you were bowing down to me. And so he had these dreams, and he had the dreams first of the sheaves in the field. The brothers' sheaves were bowing down to his sheaves. Interesting later on with all the grain and all the issues around that. And then he had the dream of the whole family, the sun, moon, and stars. He was sent to, later on, a little while later, he was sent to find his brothers and sent by his dad to go see if it's well and bring back word. So he heads out. Now, they were about 90 miles away. It was not like they were around the corner. And it's not clear why they were, it doesn't say why they were so far away, but they were not, it was at least 3 days' journey, depending on how you do it. And they were very resentful of him. They wanted to kill him. Reuben, the oldest, said, well, let's just cast him in this pit. Let's not actually kill him. We'll cast him in this pit, let him die of natural causes, and therefore we haven't killed him. Kind of a legalistic way of killing your brother. In what he was really thinking of is that he'd come back later and save him. We learn later on when they're talking about it, not so much in chapter 37, but in a later chapter, we learn that while he was in the pit, he was crying out to them. He was crying and crying out to them. He was pleading for himself. They say, they cast him in the pit was empty, there was no water, and they sat down to eat a meal. So it's like they're chilling out outside the pit. They're not, in any hurry to leave. They're not in anything. They're just scarfing a meal. Judah, they have a caravan comes along heading over to Egypt, and Judah convinces them to sell him. Might as well get some profit out of this. We don't actually have to kill a guy. They took the special tunic, the coat, whatever, and put goat's blood on it, showed it to their dad, convinced their dad that he was dead. And Joseph was sold to Potiphar. Potiphar is called an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. But if you look up the word officer, it means eunuch. It was a castrated guy, which was common for Pharaoh's court, for serving in Pharaoh's court. Makes it much more interesting when you think of this as a eunuch with a wife, and why she might be so starved. Hey, it's got to be a PG Bible study. So we have the sale of the dreamer. Now, chapter 38, we have... Oh, I'm sorry. Let's talk a little bit about his coat. The coat, as the Revised Version margin indicate, a long garment of delicate texture with sleeves that was the dress of the young princes or nobles that were not called to the menial toil of the field or household. Most likely it was seamless. It would be hard to work in. You couldn't really do the things. You could go see your brothers. It was expensive, but it really signified rulership. It was like their dad was elevating this youngest son over the others.
Wait, wasn't Benjamin the youngest?
Eventually. Benjamin wasn't here yet.
Really? There's 17 years of a difference? Sorry, I didn't realize that Benjamin was that much younger.
Yeah. Okay, so he had his dreams. And throughout Scripture, we see God using dreams to communicate with us. He still does that. Be still and hear him, and sometimes we can still our voices more when we sleep. We can be more open to things. In Joel, it shall come pass afterwards, or in the last days, that I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. So you get to see a vision, you get to see a dream. The family recognized the prophetic nature of these dreams. They recognized that he really was saying, this is something that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it'd just be, you're bothering me, kid. In the second dream, he talked about the sun, moon, and stars. And the sun, moon, and stars is an interesting reference. There's a principle called expositional constancy. And you look for the when something is mentioned the first time, the principle first mentioned. And the first time that sun, moon, and stars is mentioned, it refers to his dad interprets it. Oh, you mean your mom and your dad. It refers then to all of Israel, if you will. And in Revelation 12, we see that same phrase, the sun, moon, and stars, referring to that woman, which is why we would say that woman represents Israel. And it makes sense. As long as you go with the church not being there, then everything makes sense in terms of that. Okay, chapter 38, preserving the bloodline. the bloodline was really important. Okay, chapter 38 is a funny little story. It talks about Judah and Tamar, and God's killing a couple different guys, and it doesn't say how he killed them. But the concept is that there was one guy that got killed because he was evil, and then his brother refused to do his duty to preserve the bloodline. And some people try to make that a thing against masturbation or whatever, but all it really was is he didn't do his duty in terms of the bloodline, and so the Lord killed him. And then you had Judah saying, wait a minute, I've lost 2 of my 3 sons. I don't want to lose the 3rd one, and so I'm not going to we'll just hold off on this for a while, okay? Let's let this little guy grow up. And he never did, even after that little guy became plenty grown. And so the wife of the first guy, Tamar, was saying, well, hey, I need to preserve this bloodline. Why was that important? It turns out that in Israeli law, the bloodline is how property was transferred.
Yeah.
That property was never sold. It was leased until the next year of the Jubilee. And so you could have a lease of so many years, but you always got it back. And the property always belonged to the family. And so the bloodline and the family was the way that property was managed, and that was the way it was inherited. So it was a really important thing.
So is that like the Kingsman Redeemer?
It is. It is exactly like the Kingsman Redeemer, because you had to be a blood relative of a particular way to redeem. And when you had the kid was actually treated legally as if it was the son or daughter of the father,
So it was
the
actually
original father.
the child inherited.
Right, the child inherited, right. This story in 38 is probably preserved because this is the bloodline of the Messiah. It's a very particular, very important bloodline. And indeed, Tamar is where it came through. You had 3 sons. You had the second 2 sons have Canaanite names. You'll notice the first one, it says, he named him blah, blah, blah. And the second one, she named him blah, 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 blah. And so you have he married a Canaanite woman. She named the last 2 sons with a Canaanite name. The first son was named with the Israeli name, Jewish name, and married a Jewish wife. So it was preserving the heritage. It strongly appears that God didn't want the Messiah to come through the Canaanite woman.
So
And
Tamar was a Jewish woman?
Tamar was a Jewish woman, yes. She was the wife of the son, but it ends up being that there was no Canaanite in that union, just the way it all worked out and the way it worked out legally. And Judah is deceived into preserving the bloodline of the firstborn.